Welcome to Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we're going on a biblioventure through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and A Christmas Carol. This is episode 2 on Jekyll and Hyde. I won't hold you to the Jekyll, Olivia. We talked about I will.
It'll be hard.
I can't hold myself to it. So joining me as co-host is Olivia Ritigliano. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for having me again.
Oh, I'm so happy you're back. Thank you. If you are watching live right now, everyone, I would ask you to please like these videos. I hope you will, and subscribe to the Rosenbach's channel and have fun in the live chat. That's for you guys to have your own little community to talk while Olivia and I are also having a conversation about this book. If you're watching the recording, also please like and subscribe, and welcome to any new viewers. I hope you enjoy the show. All the episodes are available to watch on our YouTube channel, so it's easy to catch up and just watch anytime. We bring this show to you free of charge, but if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach, it would be much appreciated. If you've already donated or joined as a member, thank you so much. That's really how we get to do these shows for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you've not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. And we are going to continue a special offer for new members throughout this series. If you become a member the day of the live stream of the show, you receive an additional month added to your membership. So you get 13 months on your membership instead of 12. Olivia, a part of this show since the start is, and you won't be partaking, but I will, has always been cocktails since the very start. I smoke and I drink, and with your assistance, I talk about books. We have some fabulous Jekyll and Hyde cocktails and mocktail recipes for all of you in each episode, designed by Jobi Zink, the Registrar and Associate Director of Collections at the Rosenbach. She also designs cocktails for this show. So we wear lots of hats at the Rosenbach. What you can find a description, or you can find the recipes for the cocktails and mocktails in the YouTube description of the episode. And I also send out the recipe via email every week to those who are registered for the show. You can register at the Biblioventures homepage of the Rosenbach. And tonight it is Judges of Good Wine, and I am making I hope I do this well. I'm making I think I poured too fast and I'm spilling a lot of it, and I'm making a wine float is what it is, in which you pour the wine over. It's good to have always a roll of paper towels near your workstation when you have a drinking show. It's a good thing I did just now. And there it is. Oh, it came out very well. There it is. It is Judges of Good Wine. The quote at the beginning of the chapter, first chapter we'll hit tonight. The doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. Not content to drink just wine on this show, I decided we needed a cocktail with it, and Jobi has pulled off this one really good. It's bourbon and lemon juice, simple syrup. You could use maple syrup too. I decided to go with the simple. And she recommends a kind of a fruity red wine, like a Zinfindel, Malbec, a Cabernet. This is an Argentinian Malbec. So let's I hope it's good. Cheers.
Bottoms up.
Yeah, I just made it. So good. It was a lot of wine in the first sip. And as I go on, it'll be more bourbon. So that'll be good. So this wouldn't work for Utterson, who's trying to stop drinking.
Right, exactly.
Because he's going to get the good vintage, and then it's the mortification, doesn't it? The end of the drink. Well, let me give a full introduction to our co-host, even though she's been with us on another series, Sherlock Mondays. Olivia Ritigliano is an editor at LitHub, and it's a vertical crime reads. She was a contributing editor at the film magazine Bright Wall Dark Room. She's written essays for Vanity Fair, Vulture, Lapham's Quarterly, Los Angeles Review of Books, Public Books, The Baffler, Politics Letters, The Toast, Truly Adventurous, and elsewhere. She is a specialist in the history of mass entertainment from the late 19th and 20th centuries, has a PhD from the departments of English and Comparative Literature and Theater at Columbia University, where she was the Marion E. Ponsford Fellow. And Olivia, as I mentioned, was a co-host for the 2 Sherlock Mondays episodes on the Detectives of the Great Hiatus. Dr. Vertigliano, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Ed.
Get much do you get people to call you doctor in your life, or do they just do it anyway?
I love when they do.
Good.
It's never something I'll ask, but it's always well received.
Good. Well, it's well deserved.
Thank you.
We had a pretty successful first show here, Livia, when I had Paul on last week. And I just wanted to let everybody know who's watching to thank you. We had 338 registrants. I think we're over 340 now. But for the first show, we had 266 viewers for that show, unique viewers, and 256 watched the recording. So, we're over 500 people watched the first episode. That's really great. I'm glad you guys like this. And by any measure of the chat last week, it was quite a success from everyone. So, Olivia, you were on with Sherlock. We did the 2 Sherlock. Well, you didn't get to do Sherlock with me. You did other detectives, but we talked about Sherlock some.
Yeah, Sherlock adjacent detectives.
Yes, thank you. And this is, Doyle Sherlock is, at 1890s. This story is just shortly before 1886. So we're dealing with the same time period that Stevenson's writing. Does reading Jekyll Hyde seem like it's in the same universe?
Oh, very much so. Especially later on when the police inspector, what's his name, in Newcomen, when he arrives, and there's actually a police investigation. It feels very much that late Victorian period where the city is sort of its own mystery for its residents. Jekyll Hyde to me is a story as much about excuse me, Jekyll Hyde or Jekyll Hyde to me is as much a story about the unknowable mystery of the human psychological situation and various vices and impulses and subconscious situations within the human psyche, as it is about the unknowability of the city of London and attempting to map that just as much as attempting to map the psychology. And late Victorian London's scientific investments, shall we say, involved psychological study very, very prominently, just as much as sort of like demographic urban explorer, sort of like post Henry Mayhew kind of work. And very often those two things would come together because the people of the city of London who were thought to be like the most depraved denizens were in fact, the lower classes, and, wealthy sort of urban explorers and scientists, social scientists would foray into the seedier districts to learn more about humankind and its inclinations and its tragedies and its unusual characters. And of course, just 2 years after Jekyll Hyde is the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, which is the most famous example of the nexus of mapping the city of London and attempting to categorize a psychological situation that could allow someone to do such terrible things to other people.
Yeah. It's all that I love how you mentioned this kind of mapping of the city and how every edition needs a map. Every edition of every book needs a map. But this book, I wonder because my first reaction is I would love to see a map of it, and I've seen maps, and you can find them online, and one of our viewers, Max, shared one on Facebook using these the maps that were done in the Victorian age to see to register the economic areas of the city as well. And it's fascinating, but also I think Stevenson's he likes, he's being specific, but he's also being a little murky about it and likes the idea that we can't, like, this place doesn't seem to work right. I mean, his description of the house, it would take you several readings to figure out exactly the layout of how it works. Now, I've seen diagrams of it, and the one the Wolf annotated has a diagram of it, which is really handy. But I think that he likes the idea that this place is a bit of a maze, and how that plays into the mystery here.
Yeah. The human mind is a maze, and the house is a maze, and London is a maze.
And the house is Jekyll's head, and
Exactly.
it's like going inside. Yeah, all of that. I
It's
love
his
it.
head made manifest. Yeah. Physically.
Do you remember a first time reading this story?
Yes, I do. So I was in eighth grade when I started to read it. I had become friends with a kid in my class who has remained one of my best friends to this day. Stephen, shout out to Stephen. We were like, he had just moved into my school, and I had like I don't know, we sort of became friends because we were definitely some of the more nerdy of the kids in the school. And he was telling me about how he had to read Jekyll and Hyde the previous year in his previous school. And I was like, oh yeah, I should really read that. So I picked up a copy, like the Barnes and Noble hardcover edition that they had released like at this time, like circa 2000 and 2005, to check it out. And we would have like these little close reading discussions at lunch. And Stephen kept saying, Mr. Hyde is so short. That's because he's only a portion of the man Jekyll, and that's why Jekyll is so much taller. And I remember being like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't pick up on that. And I didn't actually read the very end too. Like something came up studying, and I never finished it until I was much older. Until I read it in college. I was reading the end, and I was like, I did not remember this. Oh, I must have left like 20 pages. So in a way, it's a story that's been with me for quite some time, but it's also a story that, as I've gotten older, somewhat literally had new revelations and new elements that I encountered.
So, like most people, you encountered it. You weren't. It was no revelation that Jekyll was Hyde, Hyde was Jekyll, right?
Absolutely not. No,
So I got
no.
that ruined by, movies or whatever. I mean, not ruined because I enjoyed those movies, but it's hard to
I
enter this text without that.
I remember, well, I had a Jack Russell Terrier growing up, and she was amazing. Her name was Maggie, but she was like so loving to her family. And then she would become an absolute psychopath the moment a stranger or someone else entered, even if that person was a child. And so my mom, like since I was in the second grade, referred to that dog as Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde. So any hope of that twist remaining intact for me would have been completely annihilated by the time I got my dog at age 7.
Although I even had, I mean, I had students in college who were shocked by it, and they said, like, well, I know what Jekyll and Hyde is, but it just didn't dawn on them that that's what was like, that it was literally him in the story. And I think Stevenson really builds it, and especially for his first reader, he really builds it as a story where it's probably going to be a doppelganger,
Yeah,
because those stories already exist where someone
right.
encounters their evil self,
Exactly.
but he's taken that story a step further in this.
Right, right. Well, he sort of seems to be responding to like the 1839 Edgar Allan Poe story with William Wilson,
Yeah.
which is about a man who believes that he has this sinister doppelganger who's sort of more popular and more interesting and more beloved than he is. And then at the end of the novel, he succeeds in killing him, and then only realizes that in fact William Wilson has been his that the doppelganger has been his reflection, and that he has killed himself. So like there's an inkling in early doppelganger stories like that the other is ultimately part of the self.
Mhm.
And in a way, Jekyll and Hyde is a continuation of that question.
Well, we're going to get into a little bit of Hyde's real nefarious deed, because as
Mm,
the first chapter, really, he knocks a girl down, but she's actually okay.
it's okay.
That
It's
wasn't the real crime that he's committed. He was rude, is what he was. But on with our story. we have shared a PDF of a facsimile on our webpage, and there's a PDF of the entire book if you'd like that as well. But each week I put PDFs of the stories up that you can of the chapters we're covering is what we put there, make it easier for you. Your take on before we get into it, your take on the opening of the novel that Paul and I discussed. I mean, we talked about the door and doors and keys all through this story. We actually meet Hyde before we meet Jekyll, and especially I think Utterson's investigation, that shades of a detective story, which I think is going on here. But what's your take on the opening couple chapters that we already did?
Well, I actually misremembered Jekyll and Hyde somehow since the last time I read it, which must have been when I was in college, because I remembered it being in the first person. And it's not. I was so surprised that Utterson is not our narrator. I mean, his name is Utterson, for crying out loud, and he's not the character doing the reporting.
Yes.
And I found that to be very striking because, in a way, it makes him more of a detective, because the detective is never the narrator. The detective is always the subject of the narration. Watson is the recorder of the stories, and various imitations, like and progenitors of the Holmes stories, like even Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue, always feature an observer who watches the detective do the work. And in this case, the observer is actually the omniscient third person narrator. And so Utterson gets to be the focus of this kind of, or his work gets to be the kind of focus in a way that separates him from this mischaracterization I had of him. So I was reading him automatically as a detective from the way I started.
Is it omniscient, or is it, I mean,
omniscient
very
enough.
much is Utterson's point of view.
Yeah. I guess we should say third person limited. I just meant it wasn't first person specific.
And I think that leads to a lot of people thinking, because I've heard well-known scholars talk about how it's a collection and it's memoirs, and I'm like, it's not. It's actually a narrative that's in third person, but it is so strongly Utterson's point of view.
Yeah, I should have said third person limited. My literary terms are getting blurred now that I'm no longer teaching. Now I'm just a humble writer. But I thought that was very interesting to me. And so when Enfield, Utterson's friend, is describing the situation and the mysteriousness about this Mr. Hyde character, I mean, it seemed like it was presented to me like a series of clues automatically, that right away what Utterson was being given was a prompt to investigate. Like, this is what I heard, this is what's going on, this is what this guy did. And Utterson immediately is like, oh, that's very unusual, I will go and find out. And then the next section is the search for Mr. Hyde. Like, the investigation commences almost immediately. So before the show we were discussing very lightly that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a bit of a detective story. And as I was reading it, I was like, no, this is really a detective story. This is a detective story right from the beginning. I mean, I love the line where in the search for Mr. Hyde section, he said, and hitherto it was his ignorance of Mr. Hyde that had swelled his indignation. Now, by a sudden turn, it was his knowledge. It was already bad enough when the name was but a name of which he could learn no more. This whole search is framed by this like epistemological need to understand who this person is and how he relates to Jekyll and what's going on. And like right from the get-go, there's this question that he will not put down, he will not let go.
Yeah. And if he be Mr. Hyde, I'll be Mr. Seek, and he's got
exactly
solve the mystery of not, I mean, who Hyde is, but in doing that, what's his relationship to Jekyll, and why is he in Jekyll's will, and he both wants to know, but doesn't want to know because this is a man who doesn't like to delve into people's secrets.
Hmm.
But once he has those secrets, he will keep them for them.
Yep.
So, all righty. Let's get to chapter 3. We will have a collections share today. I have a very special Robert Louis Stevenson manuscript that I will share and show a couple parts of that really, I think, highlight things about Stevenson's, own life that really reflect on this story. Well, on his life, but also reflect on this story. So, chapter 3. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. All the chapter titles seem to be like newspaper headlines,
Yeah, exactly.
but this one is a little bit different. The Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. A fortnight later, by excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. Wine's the beverage that's mentioned the most in this story. I think 9 times. I can't remember. But so I had to put it in a cocktail. They and we haven't met Jekyll yet. We've had 2 chapters. We've heard about him, but haven't met him yet. And here he is, and the first time we meet him, he's having a little, party for his friends. And of course, they're all men. This is a story in which women are really absent, right, Olivia?
Yes. They get occasionally trampled
Yeah.
when they're children.
Or they cry and they're upset.
Yeah, exactly. There's someone, I mean, we know who it is. Hyde has a sinister landlady. Like that's all we get.
We get to see her. Did we see her today? Yes, we see her today, right? Yes.
At the end, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Utterson is there, of course. He's well liked. Where Utterson was liked, he was liked well. Host loved to detain the dry lawyer, because he would sober their minds, in the rich, because he was there to sobering their minds in the rich man's silence after the expense and strain of gaiety. It's like his presence tempers their, high spirits, just like he drinks gin to mortify his taste for good vintages, like his presence mortifies his friends from having too much fun, indulging too much. But it's a fascinating character to create, I think, from Stevenson, in that why would you like and want to hang out with this guy? And Stevenson is more than once gives us the reason that, and because of this, because they feel like he helps them temper their desires and settle down a bit, and so it's an interesting character to put out there as a friend character.
Mm-hmm.
And we meet Jekyll, who is a large.
Oh, sorry, you were
I
gonna say the last thing. A large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast, perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness. You could see by his looks that he cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection.
Not many large, well-made Jekylls in the adaptations, although 50 will hit sometimes, and but the slyish cast, I don't know if you can. I mean, that's so difficult to put in, and to have an actor do if you were doing an adaptation anyway. That slyish cast, somewhat sly or roguish, furtive maybe. It's an odd word use. It's an odd word to use describing someone, and I was looking up usage of it in OED. The usage of slyish peaks around 1890. So it's a word that people were using around then, and then it's dropped off ever since. But there's something in him that could be up to no good. Or he has secrets, clearly, and he does have a secret because for 2 years he's been doing this. This is a big reminder last time that happened, and we'll have the reminder again. It's like, this is a while. This is 2 years he's been doing this. So
It's so interesting too because at the at the introduction, I love that he's described as having every mark of capacity and
yeah,
kindness. That's such a fascinating word given its multiplicity of meanings. And we'll learn that his capacity is greater than
yeah,
any other man's in the entire at the entire dinner party, or in probably the rest of London. But the word that there's so much room inside of him for this generosity of spirit, but there's also room inside of him for an entirely different
yeah.
self.
The OED gives that as one of the definitions. I think it's even the first is active power or force of mind,
Mhm.
mental ability or talent, and that. But it's this room. This is a space that you can put these things in, including kindness or including another being,
Mhm.
a little guy
Yeah.
who's going to come out and do mean things.
I mean,
Um,
I mean, Jekyll is like such a good progenitor of the mad scientist um, archetype because his brilliance is ultimately what leads to his downfall. He could not have experimented and resulted in Mr. Hyde in the way that his experiments had resulted in Mr. Hyde if he were not so brilliant. So that the capacity and the capacity are ultimately linked
mhm.
that way.
He But what Utterson really wants to talk to Jekyll about is that will of yours. The will in which, we learned in the last chapter that if if Jekyll not only dies, but if he disappears for a certain period of a few months, Edward Hyde will get everything, his entire estate and money, except for a few things that go to the servants, because Jekyll has no family. Um, and he hates this as a lawyer. This isn't right. And well, it's actually not even legal. Like it wouldn't hold up, but that's besides the point. They uh and he asks well, Jekyll's response is to right away trying to deflect this. He's like, oh, you're so distressed about it, but don't worry. Like it sounds like unless it were that hidebound pedant Lanyon at what he called my scientific heresies. He's a good fellow, blah blah blah. He's trying to change the conversation, like, oh, it's talk about Lanyon and how they disagree over science. It also reminds us that Jekyll is seen as someone who challenges these kind of people who are orthodox in their scientific beliefs. But it's also interesting that Jekyll knows that Utterson has already met Hyde. So because he has his memories and vice versa, they don't. It's not the case where the multiple personalities, but that you're not aware. They're
Right?
aware.
He's
Yeah,
not the wolf man.
yeah. He's aware of what's going on here, so he knows that Utterson has already met him. Um, and then um, so Utterson disregards him trying to change the subject, and he says, "I've been learning something of young Hyde," and the large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. Now he knows, but he doesn't. But he knows he's met him, but that he's been learning about him. That's what Jekyll doesn't want. Um, this concern of how Hyde's reputation might affect him, what he's been doing will come back to him. This is, not what he, wants to happen. Um, and his response too is, well, Utterson is what I heard was abominable. And then Jekyll is, you do not understand what he says is not in any way going to get Utterson to back off. You do not understand my position. I am painfully situated. My position is a very strange one. It is one of those affairs that cannot be helped mended by talking. That sounds like he's in trouble, or connected in some way that he can't get out of it, uh, and that he won't tell Utterson is only going to have Utterson come up with his own reasons, right? Um, and then the reminder here too is oh, the lawyer says what and also the other thing is I've been learning something of young Hyde, Utterson says. Um, and a nice reminder to us that Hyde's young.
He's in
Jekyll's
his
about
20s.
yeah, he's in his 20s and Jekyll is 50.
Mhm.
I mean he's not. Hyde is 50.
Right, but
But he looks like he's
20.
in his 20s. And that that's fascinating that he is, that this is the way Stevenson has chosen to show this transformation of your evil self would be much younger, I guess, without experience.
Well, I think the idea, yeah, I think the idea is that um well, doesn't Jekyll say later, much later? This is a bit of a spoiler, so I actually don't know if I should say it, but that there's a part of himself that was repressed, that
Yeah.
that he stopped repressing at a period of time, and it, corresponds roughly to about 20 years of like his moral education or his experience. Um and um and that sort of accounts for that physical transformation, just as the smallness of Hyde relative to like the
Mm.
bigness of Jekyll that we keep hearing. Um um this the point of Jekyll is that it's not a story of good versus evil. It's that Jekyll is a composite of all of the qualities.
Yeah.
Hyde is just the evil. So Hyde's evil is younger because it also doesn't it hasn't had the rest of the room as all of the other stuff to percolate through and grow.
And there's that idea too that he's an undeveloped
Yes.
like like the primitive
Right.
atavism
Mhm.
would be
Yeah.
undeveloped. We're older and wiser now, and this is a throwback.
Right, right. And I mean, this absolutely corresponded with the threads of Victorian, the scientific questions and experimentation of the time period. Like, is it possible to, sort of a, phrenology sense, like, is it possible to divine someone's mental capacity or emotional or psychological identity from physical features?
Mhm.
And so Hyde is sort of like this ugly, young looking but ugly sort of, you know, proto human, this undeveloped, fully
It's hard to find words because
yeah,
Stevenson's characters don't quite, they're like he's some kind of deformed, like
yeah.
they can't quite
We
put
don't get
a finger on it,
we don't get an exact physical encapsulation of what makes Hyde so off-putting objectively. But we don't see Jekyll transform into Hyde, but in the moment at the very beginning of this chapter, um when our hero is like, what if, let's talk about this. When Utterson's like, what is the line? I have been learning something of young Hyde. The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. Like that, the sort of distilled evil of Hyde is sort of peering
it's kind
through
of starting to come
Jekyll's
out. Yeah.
visage. Yeah, that there is some sort of physical transformation that suggests, like, a connected physicality between the two of them there. But anyway, young Hyde, we were saying.
Well, I mentioned also briefly that that this has been 2 years, and I thought I had talked about this last time. I actually don't think I had in the first episode. It's just a reminder that how long Jekyll has been turning into Hyde. It's not, we don't get this in this passage here, but when Enfield tells Utterson about Hyde, that was an incident from a previous winter. It's in the fall, and it was like the previous winter. So, the story now we're reading it is in the fall and early winter. And when we get to Jekyll's confession at the end, we can kind of piece this together, this time frame. And you kind of need to, because Stevenson doesn't really give us these dates and work it out easily for us. You've got to kind of piece it together. This is a collection of documents that you put together and figure out. Um, but Jekyll was turning into Hyde for about a year before he tramples the girl. And then it was almost a year to this moment. So he's already he's been becoming Hyde for he's had 2 years of Hyde adventures is what he has had already. And now Utterson's telling him that there are stories about Hyde. Well, of course there are, because he's been out and about for 2 years now as Mr. Hyde. Um, and it's easy to not realize that it's that long period of time, because almost all adaptations start with you meet Jekyll and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to challenge things." Everybody's like, "No, you can't do that." And he does. He takes the potion, he turns into Hyde, and does anything. And it's all a very linear chronology from start to end. But this story starts very much in media res, and but you don't know that. You don't find that out. You piece it together little by little until the end, when you realize that in his final confession you'll get all of this. But um, it gets to it's all at this point in the story, it's already 2 years that he's been doing it. Okay. Jekyll's reasons for his connection with Hyde are they're vague, but it's I like that he's using this. He's using my and I, like, I am painfully situated. My position is very strange. Um, uh, that I guess I almost feel like he's trying to assert himself, like, I'm in control here. Well, you're not in control, but we don't see that yet. We will, but this is the first hints that he might not be in control. And I will tell you one thing: the moment I choose, I can be rid of Hyde. Um, that's the thing that really gives that clue to addiction, right? That's something, especially then, they would say, "Oh, I can quit at any time." So, um, and there's a lot of this. I mean, this is also a story about someone addicted to a drug that he takes that changes him into someone else, and can't stop doing it. And then at some point it overtakes his life. There's a good bit of this in Stevenson's life too, with one of his friends, and we'll get to that in a minute. But because in this, what I want to share now is one of the items in our collection at the Rosenbach is a manuscript, which is a fragment of an autobiography. This is from the catalog description in 1914 when it was sold at auction. Fragment of an autobiography, portions of the last 2 pages of Book 2 and the whole of Book 3, from jest to earnest, quoted largely in the Life by Balfour. Graham Balfour wrote Life of Stevenson, and he used these documents. They were written by Stevenson in America, I think when he was in San Francisco, 1880, maybe 1879, around when he's 30 years old. He mentions at one point in the documents that he's 30, but it might have been a little shortly before then. And they also, some of this fragment Balfour used, but there were pieces he didn't. And you can find it sometimes in a biography, or I think there's actually parts that have never been published, but I haven't been able to find out entirely. But I've transcribed the whole thing, and also noted all the places where the parts that are not in Balfour's life. Let me share this now. This is just the case for it's a fragment of his autobiography, Stevenson. There's a catalog from 1914 when this was sold, and there's a I managed to find the catalog online. It was sold at the catalog: autograph letters, manuscripts, books, portraits, and curios from the library of the late Robert Louis Stevenson by the present owner, Mrs. Isabel Strong of Santa Barbara, California. This was his stepdaughter, that had sold this for the Anderson Galleries in New York in 1914. And there's the one copy I was able to find online of this catalog has someone has written prices next to everything, like or what they had sold for, and this they had written 100 is written next to it, and it looks like it probably sold for $100. Would sell for more now, but I don't know when Dr. R. I didn't go into the archives to find out when Dr. R. acquired this. His friend Harry Elkins Widener had the part one fragment, and they had that published in a little special edition. But this part of it had never been published. And starts on page 25. You see here, it's torn. These are just a couple shots that I took of it with my camera. This page was just cut I'm assuming by Stevenson. In putting this together. And here is page 25. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about, and this is his life, Olivia, in Edinburgh in his kind of wild days, hanging out with, this with the rough set in Edinburgh. And there's a good bit of it here that's in Balfour, but then here is a part that is not. It starts at the bottom of this page. I must tell the story of Mary H. And then it's continued over here. She was a robust, great-haunched, blue-eyed young woman. I'm not going to just read from this because I know I'll mess it up. I got my transcription here. Of admirable temper, and if you will let me say so, of a prostitute, admirable modesty. Every now and again, she would go to work. Once, I remember, for some months in some factory down Lath Walk, from which I often met her returning. But when she was not upon the streets, she did not choose to be recognized. She was perfectly self-respecting. I had certainly small fatuity at the period, for it never occurred to me that she thought of me except in the way of business. Here is that line. She thought except in the way of business, like he's a customer. And probably one of the reasons why Balfour, who was writing an authorized biography from the family, with the family okaying everything he put in there, probably didn't want this in there. Though I now remember her attempts to waken my jealousy, which being very simple, I took at the time for gospel. Years and years after all this was over and gone, when I was walking sick and sorry alone, I met Mary somewhat carefully dressed, and we recognized each other with a joy that was, I dare say, a surprise to both. I spent 3 or 4 hours with her in a public house parlor. She was going to emigrate in a few days to America. We had much to talk about, and she cried bitterly, and so did I. We found in that interview that we had been dear friends without knowing it. I can still hear her recalling the past in her sober Scotch voice, and I still feel her good, honest, loving hand as we said goodbye. It's a very touching little reminiscence, right, Olivia, of this, woman that he met who was a prostitute, but he doesn't seem to have any hang-ups about that at all. This is just who she was. And they could certainly be friends. The next, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's such an interesting morsel in the life of Stevenson, who grew up with this very traditional religious upbringing, and then like slowly rejected that over the course of his youth, and embraced a much more bohemian side of things. And this is sort of emblematic of like once he's on the other side of that transformation.
Yeah. Well, he also talks about his friends in this. His kind of drinking buddies went around up to no good, having fun in Edinburgh. And some of this is in Balfour, but some is not. And this is about his friends James Walter Ferrier, or Ferrier. I'm not sure how they would have pronounced it, because he's Scotch. He's not French. It is, but he describes him, and Balfour cuts out all the good stuff, all the interesting stuff, and all the stuff that's, not maybe, maybe Ferrier's family doesn't want to hear. And it begins down here of what was cut out. It is, but he was consumed, wrecked and wrecked by a miserable craving for drink. Will be, I forget now, will be, I still have to ask, I still have to ask myself as I write these words, will he outlive the tendency and become a conscientious, and kind gentleman as we know him in his sober hours, or will he go, this is the next page, downward to the sot, the sponge, and the buffoon? When I last parted from him 5 months ago, he and I, for the first time in our intimacy, shed tears together over this problem, because that alternative. He promised me, for my sake as well as for his own, to continue the good fight, and yet ever since I have feared to write to him. Here's what I really find fascinating that ties in with this, book that we're reading now. What a man can be in one envelope. I love this word choice here, envelope. Two creatures so widely different, and yet each in its own way and to a different criticism, so engaging, is one of the puzzles of my life. It was originally problems. What a man can be in one envelope, two creatures so widely different, and yet each in its own way to a different criticism, so engaging. This idea that drink, that alcoholism, that someone who is deeply affected with that addiction could be in one person, one envelope, two beings, two creatures, is already there in his life in such a way that his friend Ferrier dies of his addiction. He dies of alcoholism in 1883. That's 3 years before he writes this, and before he writes this Jekyll and Hyde. And the is this, and Stevenson is so effective. He's so distraught, and he writes to everybody. And there's pieces in this fragment that he actually put in the fragment that he's taken out of letters that he's written to people. There's a few lines that he's actually pulled right out of letters that this has stayed with him, and this idea has been with him the whole time, that someone could have these two parts. So that after all that, all I'm trying to say is that not only does it seem to us, and would have seemed to people at the time, that one of the themes of this novel is addiction, it was clearly in Stevenson's head as he's putting this together. This idea of this double life, and the two of us, and Stevenson, myself, and the other fellow that he writes about, he's always got this idea, but specifically the idea of having a part of you that is, going to destroy you, that is monstrous, is always there with him. And a reminder that anyone can visit the Rosenbach to see our collections. We make our collections, our library and fine and decorative arts collections, available for research by anyone, while approximately half of our researchers are traditional scholars, academic faculty, graduate students, doctors, Ritiglianos could come and research there. We also welcome younger students, the teachers, artists, writers, librarians, collectors, curators, dealers, anybody with an inquiring mind who wants to see our collection. You can go online to the rosenbach.org and find the policies and see how you can set up an appointment to come and see these documents in person. Well, Olivia, I was so happy to find that document and those mentions, because those lines aren't in any of the biographies that I'm reading. And they might just be in a biography I'm not aware of yet. I don't know because Balfour has a collection. There's a collection of Balfour papers in Scotland, and I don't know if the pieces that are not in his life are also in that collection, or if what's in that collection is just what he's copied out that he wants to use. So I'll have to find out. Do some
No,
real research.
it's fascinating. I mean, it's useful to think about what, Stevenson was experiencing in his life at the time he wrote this, the various, questions that he might have had about, addiction and alcoholism, etc. I mean, reading it, especially the line where, I mean, we've said this, but where Jekyll is like, yeah, I can make Hyde, I can be rid of him anytime I want.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so damning in that reading.
I can stop reading at any time, right after the next chapter.
Exactly.
It's always then.
One of the, speaking of vices, sort of, I was reading in preparation for appearing on this Biblioventures series, I was reading some interesting scholarship about Jekyll and Hyde that was written by Vladimir Nabokov. He has this really wonderful in the sense that it's fascinating and enriching, not in the sense that it's wonderful in tone. He's actually rather cranky about Jekyll and Hyde in tone. I think he calls it rather lame as a detective story, for example, which I disagree with. But he talks a lot about Jekyll's relationship to the sort of so-called or so perceived vices of the Victorian era. And one of the things that he talks about more than addiction or alcoholism is the suggestion of like illegitimacy and or homosexuality related to Jekyll. He notes that one of the words that's used to describe Hyde is favorite, which has a sort of, a personal connotation. And when, one of the things that Utterson will try to figure out is how Hyde is, how Jekyll is beholden to Hyde, and how Hyde has sort of wormed his way into Jekyll's household and emotional identity such that he is the inheritor of this will, and the two things that would jump to the average Victorian reader's mind is that this is like an indecent secret relationship, and that he's a homosexual, and that Hyde is his partner in this illegal and illicit affair, or that Hyde is Jekyll's illegitimate son.
Yeah.
So no matter what, Hyde's presence in Jekyll's life sort of challenges the notion of sort of like a sober, consistent, respectable Victorian existence. And in this way, Nabokov suggests that we're never sort of supposed to read Jekyll as like a moral arbiter, and we're always supposed to see him as this susceptible gray figure, someone who might easily become swayed by any of these, vices or passions or secret desires or crimes, and that he's more of an everyman than his sort of like singular genius scientist existence would lead us to believe.
Well, we'll really see that at the end in his confession.
Yes.
Then we really find out his true character, and what we'll learn is that the Jekyll is good and Hyde is evil is really not true. That all comes into play, and I definitely want to touch on that kind of queer angle when we get to the Carew murder case in a bit. But the idea of that Hyde may be an illegitimate son in the drafts that exist in the note. I'm not sure it's in the notebook draft or the printer's draft. There are some deleted lines where Utterson wonders if it's Jekyll's son, and then Stevenson, I think in the end, rightly took it out because it makes it more like now, what is it? Like, I'm not going to tell you what it is at all. And I don't think it's evidence that in Stevenson's mind, that's what the relationship, like, that's what he wanted people to think. I think he wanted people to not know, and that it would be, and that's why he took it out. But, yeah. And I also, we last week we commented on protege, that Hyde is called his protege, and that seems like a fancy French word for something that it's not, a euphemism it seems. And favorite is one that you mentioned that does, he gets called that too. Yeah.
And when Hyde when Hyde's lodgings are
And this little speech he gives here, I have a very great interest in poor Hyde. I know you have seen him. He told me so, and I fear he was rude, but I do sincerely take a very great interest in that young man. And if I am taken away, Utterson, you're giving the side eye. I wish you to promise me that you will bear with him and get his rights for him. I think you would if you knew all, and it would be a weight off my mind if you would promise. Now, and that could go either way. That could be, he is a young man that maybe he's my young lover, or it could be that he is my son, especially to get his rights for him seems to hint at that. But Jekyll could get Utterson to stop looking immediately if he just says like he's my son. And then Utterson would just like, enough said. Tut tut. No more need be said, sir. I'll take care of it. And he'd be fine. But
right. And he doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
Well, he only asks for justice for him. Ask you to help him for my sake. And I want everybody to remember that too, that Jekyll is pleading for Hyde. Justice for Hyde, the person who we know does nothing, pleasant, and will soon murder. But now at least he's asking for this before the murder. But this is what kind of moral decision is Jekyll making here to want to preserve Hyde's life if he himself never comes back? So it's unusual. All right. Or that he might not choose to come back. I think I just want to be Jack Hyde for the rest of my life. Maybe he's thinking that. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow biblioventurers worldwide. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and this show by donation, which you can do so at our website, or you could become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, and early access to registration. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And thank you to Adam W. from Lewis, Delaware, who joined the Rosenbach in the last week. So thanks to Adam and all of you who have donated or joined as members and help us all take this Biblioventure. If you join, I'll say your name on the air too. We are still running. So thanks, Adam. Adam W. We are still running a special offer for new members as well. If you become a member the day of a live stream of the show, you will receive an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months. Also, there's lots of great in-person programs and courses, in-person programs available now on our website, but also lots of in-person programs and courses, online courses, available too. There's a Macbeth course that's online that's coming up soon. There's 2 spots left in it. Macbeth, my favorite Shakespeare. And October, the Halloween month's time to read Macbeth. It's a horror play. There's a few spots left in a course on Jorge Luis Borges. What is it? The 80th anniversary of Borges's. I forget. There's a Borges anniversary. I don't know what it is. Sorry. I will be teaching a Dracula course online that starts in January, but you can register now. So go to the Rosenbach's website and find out about all these great courses and programs. You can also join us on the Facebook group page, Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts, for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun about the stories we are covering. And you can always write to me at epettit, P-E-T-T-I-T, at rosenbach.org. I love to hear from all of you. Back to our story, the Carew murder case, chapter 4. It doesn't say chapter 4 in the book, but it's chapter 4. Nearly a year later, another year. So, and that's why I wanted to remind people the 2 years before, because it was 2 years then. This is a whole year later that this happens. Now, when we get to, the end, we'll find out that there was a period in there that he stops being Hyde and then this happens, but it's not that long. and it's, it is, but it's 3 years that Jekyll has been becoming Hyde. Um, and then I think what, especially when we get to the end of the confession, because I need to say this now because we're talking about addiction, but at the end we'll talk about this choice in addiction and the kind of, the way, and especially the way the Victorians thought of it. I think the way the way that Stevenson was understanding it, which was not entirely like the Victorians, like it was only a character issue, which I think would have been the prevailing, thought of the time. But Stevenson was well read in, medical literature and was starting, and everyone was starting to understand addiction. And but also Stevenson can't escape his, Scots Presbyterian, Calvinist background, that, there's sin involved here. So, and there's choice in sin too. So, all righty. Here's the crime, and I love that it's the Carew murder case, right? Like this is what readers are used to, or will be used to soon, reading about the Carew murder case. um I love the setting of the scene here. It's a foggy night in London. There's a full moon. The fog rolled over the city. The maid's looking out her window. And then she sees an aged, beautiful gentleman with white hair. And here's where I'm starting. And then this young man comes up, and they have words, and it's Hyde, and then he kills him. But this aged gentleman with white hair, and then a very small gentleman. The older man bowed and accosted the other with a very pretty manner of politeness. Maybe he was inquiring his way. And then Hyde, beats him to death. Um, is there a suggestion here as well as something homosexual in this encounter?
Yes, most definitely. Yes, it's represented in this very like secretive, furtive, illicit way.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock at night under the full moon on the
Mhm.
street.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's it's a story that's being told throughout to us, like also by this observer. It's not quite a voyeur because it's the maid sort of looking out the window, and but we get, these different, like these lenses through to the actual encounter, which sort of obfuscate its true nature from us, leading us to conclude that it is perhaps something more indecent, so to speak.
And while the Oscar Wilde trial is not, it's not that many years away, but it's not yet. But and the prosecution of him was an answer to the very open homosexuality that had been going on in the city, and it was just an open secret that Wilde and many others were just, were being homosexual and didn't care what you thought about it. And then, certain powers to be said, well, yes, we do, and we're going to prosecute you over that. But this is going on. There are not only would it not be unusual for someone at the time to read these passages and to come to these conclusions, but J.A. Symonds, who was a famous historian at the time that Stevenson knew and was on one of his rescue, the one in Davos, Switzerland, when he went to cure his respiratory problems. He met Symonds, and they spent a lot of time together and became friends. And Symonds was a homosexual and very troubled by it, and we know that from his diaries and how troubled he was by this, because he was married, because he had to be in society, but he really had a hard time with it, with repressing it. And he wrote a letter to Stevenson, "My dear Lewis," which is what everybody referred to him. I don't know if I mentioned that in the first episode. His friends called him Lewis. Uh, My dear Lewis, at last I have read Dr. Jekyll, he would have said. It makes me wonder whether a man has a right so to scrutinize the abysmal deeps of personality. It is indeed a dreadful book. He doesn't mean bad there. He means it gives him dread, inspires dread. It is indeed a dreadful book, most dreadful because of a certain moral callousness, a want of sympathy, a shutting out of hope. This is his friend writing to him about what he thinks about the book. It has left such a deeply painful impression on my heart that I do not know how I am ever to turn to it again. The fact is that, viewed as an allegory, it touches one too closely. Most of us, at some epoch of our lives, have been upon the verge of developing a Mr. Hyde. Simmons seems to get the hint that, oh, this is what you're writing about. And Stevenson himself was kind of so effeminate in his bohemian style, and with one of the biographies about Simmons, I think a couple of the biographies about Simmons and Stevenson think that Simmons thought that Stevenson was gay too, and like everybody's gaydar seemed to be like, oh, Stevenson's gay, but he probably wasn't. But we don't even know, and clearly it doesn't matter so much. But what matters is that Stevenson doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with that in people's lives, and he's also very aware of the anxiety it brings out in others, and especially in a horror story where that could be an anxiety that other men like Utterson and Enfield would find very troubling and would want to cover up about one of their friends.
Yeah, that's fascinating and very well said. I mean, Stevenson's whole life is a move away from this sort of very rigid, Calvinist upbringing towards an incredible bohemiana, and like the fact that his story is, sort of communicating this like understanding of the thing that everybody knew was happening in London, but not publicly acknowledging, is an endorsement of his increasingly open-minded and thoughtful viewpoints. I mean, the thing about the Oscar Wilde trial is that like everybody knew Oscar Wilde was gay. This was not a shock at all. He was even like the fact that he was even on trial for gross indecency at all didn't have to do with some sort of public revelation of his homosexuality, but the fact that his boyfriend's father was really pissed off by it. He's sort of, I don't know, we can say dating, he was with this man named Lord Alfred Douglas, who was a noble stock, and he went by Bosie. He would later go on to become a fascist. He was a real weirdo, but Bosie and Oscar were in love, and Bosie's father was not happy about it, and that is why Oscar Wilde went to jail. That is why he was on trial. It is because Bosie's father did not want this grown man corrupting his son, and it's not because nobody knew this about Wilde.
A few years after Jekyll and Hyde is published, Wilde publishes A Picture of Dorian Gray, and there's all this kind of repressed vice going on, and that, or not even vice, repressed lifestyles going on in that book, and hedonism, people who make decisions to have a hedonistic life and want to keep it secret and find ways to keep it secret. I mean, there's a lot of great connections you can make with Dorian Gray and this novel as well, and of course because they come out of the same time where the same ideas and anxieties are swirling in the air. All right, I'm gonna pour some more wine on my new drink here and hope I don't spill it all over the place. I should have put my wine in a little pourer.
We were talking about this, but there exists in Europe, on the continent, this company that makes Jekyll and Hyde gin and tonics, and it comes in two beakers, and the Jekyll one is very little. Is very big, I think, and the Hyde one is very little, and one is pink and one is blue, and you're supposed to mix them together to make the perfect gin and tonic, and it becomes purple when you do. And it's not available in the United States. If it were available, I would break my lifelong aversion to alcohol and be sipping it right here.
There it is. You
There
shared
it
a
is.
picture of
Yeah.
it with me before.
Yeah, okay, so they actually switched the sizes. They made
They
Mr.
did.
Hyde big, and they made Mr.
Because
Dr.
that's what always happens
Yeah.
in movies. Hyde's the giant monster. But they use the Robert Mamoulian with Fred. This is Frederick March, and that's March as Hyde. That's the makeup. So they use that for which I love, which I'm
Yeah.
sure they weren't allowed to, but they did it anyway.
Yeah, it's really cool. If any of our listeners are in Europe, please feel free to try and let us know how it is.
We will have a drink similar to that for one of the later episodes. So that was using Empress Gin, which changes colors, and we have that coming up in one of the later episodes. That'll be fun.
Oh my God,
we will get to do something like that anyway. All righty. There's a murder. She watches it happen. The maid. Hyde broke out of all bound. Well, first of all, he broke out all of a sudden he broke out in a great flame of anger, stamping with his foot, brandishing the cane, and carrying on, as the maid described it, like a madman. Mr. Hyde broke out of all bounds and clubbed into the earth. Then with an ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim underfoot, hailing down a storm of blows under which the bones were audibly shattered and the body jumped upon the roadway. It's a vicious scene, and it's not he trampled this girl and it was horrible and she was screaming, and then she was like, oh, I'm fine. And everybody, blackmails Hyde. This is real now. And he has, done something horrific here, and we get, the complete description of it. And then it's like a case, because then they talk about the stick. Now you get the murder scene. There's the stick, and the purse and the watch are still on the victim, and there's a letter addressed to Utterson, which he had been probably carrying to the post, which is like, is that like the stupid cop saying that? Because it's 11 at night. He's not going out to mail his letter at 11 at night. Or is that a clue from Stevenson saying, like, he was probably carrying a letter to the mail, like that's them giving him an excuse to be out meeting another man on the street at 11, kind of thing. But Utterson now is connected to this, and Utterson doesn't want to be connected to anything like this, obviously. That's not the way he lives his life. So they bring the letter to Utterson. It's interesting because they don't open it. It doesn't seem, I guess it's addressed to him, so they can't open it. But if it was at a crime scene, a murder, I think are you allowed to do that? I don't know what the laws would have been then, but.
Well, they were really, really loosey-goosey compared to now. Yeah. I mean, like in the Jack the Ripper murder case, famously, like the shawl that was on one of the victims that actually probably contained what we now know to be DNA of the actual Jack the Ripper, gave it to his wife, and she put the police officer took it home, gave it to his wife, and she put it in like a trunk. So there really were not a lot of codified practices about what to do with evidence, and especially because there was so little known about how to extract information, invisible information from clues. They were sort of just taken home. Yeah. So this reflects a sort of like contemporary lack of protocol.
Well, they bring the letter to Utterson, and then next morning before he was out of bed, they bring it to him. No sooner had he seen it and been told the circumstances that he shot out a solemn lip. I shall say nothing till I have seen the body. This may be very serious. Well, yeah, it is already serious. Have the kindness to wait while I dress. And then someone pointed out, Mary Lou pointed this out on the Facebook today, that and with the same grave countenance, he hurried through his breakfast and drove to the police station. Like, I'm going to eat first. I mean, the body's not going anywhere, but still, it's, it's very, I'm still taking care of when I need to take. This is my morning. I'm going to have my paper.
It's very English. It's so English.
So, he recognizes him. He says he's the one that identifies him. It's Sir Danvers Carew. They show him the broken stick, and Utterson realizes that this is a stick that he himself had presented to Henry Jekyll at one point as a gift. So he says, and then he says, "I'll take you to Hyde's house." He doesn't mention Jekyll to the police. Doesn't mention that that's Jekyll's stick. He's going to take him to Hyde's house because he knows where Hyde lives because Hyde gave him his card. Uh, his address in Soho. I love this description here, Olivia. Their drive to Soho, right? You want to read that? It was by this time.
It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-colored pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and routing these embattled vapors, so that as the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson beheld a marvelous number of degrees and hues of twilight. For here it would be dark like the back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich, lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration. And here for a moment the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho seen under these changing glimpses, with its muddy ways and slatternly passengers, and its lamps, which had never been extinguished or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed, in the lawyer's eyes, like a distinct district of some city in a nightmare. The thoughts of his mind, besides, were of the gloomiest dye, and when he glanced at the companion of his drive, he was conscious of some touch of that terror of the law and that law's officers, which may at times assail the most honest.
I love this script. Well, I mean, just that I love that description of the scene. We could keep reading. We could go through all of it.
Just a little bit. As the cab drew up before the address indicated, the fog lifted a little and showed him a dingy street, a gin palace, a low French eating house, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and twopenny salads, many ragged children huddled in the doorways, and many women of many different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass. And the next moment the fog settled down again upon that part, as brown as umber, and cut him off from his blackguardly surroundings. This was the home of Henry Jekyll's favorite, of a man who was heir to £250,000 sterling.
His favorite. Not his son, not his illegitimate. That's favorite. Favorite is definitely a different word. But that description too, it reminds me of what Doyle was doing later, I think, an imitation of Stevenson, and that you get these descriptive scenes in London every now and then in a story, and Doyle loves Stevenson, and I think he's, catching on that it's a great thing to describe it, especially the fog. Janine W says the fog described as brown. Is that pollution, you think? Yeah, it was pollution. It wasn't really fog. It was smog. It was coal dust caught in the air.
And it was also manure, because most of the streets of London in the 19th century were caked in this thick brown material. It's not Mayhew, but it's another writer of the time period refers to it as being like wet almost all of the time, and in the summer months dry and sort of like rising in dust above the streets. And it's like 98% manure ultimately. So it's a combination of smog and coal dust, and also like animal feces that everyone's walking around in, and the fog sort of comes from above in the sense that it's coal dust, but it's sort of its ability to envelop the street has to come from the fact that the dust is everywhere.
And not even knowing that it's that and calling it fog and thinking that, Stevenson and people are aware that it's also, a pollutant, but this idea that it is, it's cloaking the city. It's creating this atmosphere that hides things. And just the colors and the light and the way he plays with light in this are really wonderful for him as a writer to paint this scene. And then we get into Soho, and it's like a nightmare. It's like this nightmare landscape that they're driving into. And then, but it's also a very poor place, the gin palace, the retail for penny numbers and twopenny salads. And don't miss the many women of many different nationalities. So it's a diverse area, passing out key in hand. Do you know what this is? Do you know what this key in hand means? Key, if a woman's walking around with a key in this neighborhood, that means she's a prostitute. That's one of the signifiers that that's a woman who's a prostitute. Um, I have the key to my own place is kind of
Right.
what it says, but it is people knew that was a sign that they could use. Um, and of course they're having their morning glass. So, and that's not orange juice. So it's gin. Well, it's bourbon, but
No, it's not Utterson's hearty English breakfast.
no. Um, and this is where Jekyll's favorite lives. This is where Hyde lives. I mean, this is we've seen already the descriptions in the last chapter, 2 chapters ago, of Jekyll's house in the front of it and how respectable and nice it is. And Utterson goes inside and it's this wonderful waiting, like the hall Utterson loves. It's just the waiting hall I love. It's so comfortable and enjoyable, and this is another world that that Jekyll's Hyde is in. Um, the Oh, and to mention too that Jekyll is heir to, well, Hyde is now, well, yes, Hyde is heir to £250,000. 250,000 pounds is a lot of money. And he's not saying 250 invested, that's 250 in sterling in the real, that's Jekyll has that kind of fortune. That he has obviously inherited from family. It's not like, I mean, he doesn't, doctors and surgeons don't get rich then like that, like from fees. Jekyll is this rich because he clearly comes from a family that has been this rich. And you can compute it if you want, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you compute it. What it means is he's really, really rich. And Hyde is can inherit all that if Jekyll just disappears.
I just quickly calculated it. It's 40 million pounds in
Yeah.
today's money. But it's such a wonderful thing to mention at the end of this paragraph, describing the pollution and the poverty and the sort of like the den of sin that they've gone into. And in this place, in this thicket of the city, is where there is a man who is inheriting an enormous fortune.
And these were precisely the neighborhoods in Edinburgh that Stevenson liked to frequent and hang around in with, and with Mary H. and others. And this is where he felt comfortable. Now, he came from the nice part of Edinburgh and he had money in his family. They were very respectable, but he didn't get much allowance. So he came into these areas with not much money anyway and would come in and just, sit and write and hang out with people and enjoy himself there. And I don't think it's for the end. Like, does Stevenson think that it was his Hyde then? I mean, he does and he doesn't. Like, he does believe he has a Hyde, but he doesn't think it's this evil monster that Jekyll has. And it's because maybe Jekyll is repressing this and it comes out as a monster because of the repression. And Stevenson does not repress his desires. So he doesn't wind up murdering people. But that's more for later. That's a little hint to think about those things as this goes along, and especially as it finishes. The woman, the landlady, is an ivory-faced, silvery-haired old woman, and it has an evil face smoothed by hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is a key word for Stevenson because that's what the book's about for him. People say it's about good and evil, and all of a sudden Stevenson says it's about hypocrisy. He writes in a letter, and here she is. She's a hypocrite because she knows Hyde is evil, but she's happy to take his money and gleeful about him finally getting caught. Maybe she says his habits were very irregular, and he was often absent. For instance, it was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. So for 2 months, Jekyll was not Hyde. And as soon as he becomes Hyde, after a period of 2 months, that's when he murdered Carew. We'll read about more of that later in the end. But there was an odious joy on her face. He's in trouble. What has he done? She loves this. And they go in and they look at his luxurious apartment, right? I mean, this description of this neighborhood, and then you walk into here and it's luxury and good taste, wine, silver plate. The napery was elegant. A good picture hung upon the walls, a gift, as Utterson supposed, from Henry Jekyll, who was much of a connoisseur. Um, yeah, it was a gift, kind of. It's Hyde has the same taste as Jekyll in paintings. Maybe Jekyll furnished it, or maybe Hyde just went out because, hey, that's the kind of pictures I like. Um, and They find he had burned his papers and the other half of the stick that he beat Carew with, and several thousand pounds. They found a check book, and they went to the bank then, and he has several thousand pounds in the bank. Um, Jekyll has set up Hyde like well. So, and it takes Jekyll to do it. Like as he's Jekyll, he's got to. Actually, it's not even true because Hyde can then sign checks in Jekyll's name because it's the same signature. But there had to be some arrangement, at least in the beginning, with the bank that he could give him money. But he's got money already. Hyde's got it all. And yet he goes and does something stupid like murder Carew. So no one can find him. They look around, and we get at the end, we get this people were like trying to figure out what he looked like. And there was the haunting sense of unexpressed deformity, which with the fugitive impressed his beholders. Nobody can quite describe him, but it doesn't matter because nobody knows, he has no connections except Jekyll. So, because he's Jekyll, and Utterson doesn't know this. Sherlock would have figured this out, right? Like Sherlock would have known this
in like 2 minutes. Recounting of the first story would have been like, oh yeah, that's because they're the same guy.
Well, clearly with the letter that we find out now,
Yeah.
like this is the thing that Holmes would have wanted to confirm it. But he already figured out, oh my gosh, this scientist has figured out a potion to change his identity, and this is him. So, there are a couple Holmes, Jekyll and Hyde pastiches out there. But maybe we'll talk about him at the end in the final with Leslie Klinger. So Sally asks, why are we not considering multiple personality disorder? The first case on USA diagnosed in 1811. I have to look. Probably it's there. I mean, Stevenson knows this, but Stevenson could likely have been aware of that because he reads medical literature and he's aware of these kinds of things. But what we do know is Stevenson was very not obsessed, but he has an ongoing theme of this duality in people and in himself that he writes about in several stories. Markheim is another one, a story that he writes shortly after this or shortly before, I can't remember, around the same time. And the whole Deacon Brodie incident that, he's aware of Deacon Brodie his whole life, has his cabinet in his bedroom as a child, hears the stories about him, this man who leads two separate lives. So these are all the things that are really alive in Stevenson that he's putting into these stories. I wouldn't know how, if he's specifically aware of multiple personality disorder in casework at this point. But
yeah, we know. I mean, at this time, a lot of the Victorians are attempting to understand the human psychology. I mean, a very common term to use to describe anyone who practiced psychology at this time, which was a very new field, was an alienist, as you probably know if you've read Caleb Carr's famous novel or seen the TV show, the series adaptation. But an alienist was a psychologist. It was, that term was specifically created by the idea of like duality within the self when someone was mentally ill. The idea was that if you had a mental illness, you were alienated from your original self with this other personality. So like multiple personality disorders, you know, obviously were not refined conceptually until much later, but were, you know, were thought about in this sort of abstract sense very much. And so it makes sense that Stevenson would have known about this, but it's less that he's sort of basing it on like a very specific scientific diagnosis and more on this like cultural current of fascination and preoccupation with this idea.
It's Stevenson and Freud overlap, and they live at the same time here, and they're reading the same kind of literature. They're reading the same things that the things that Freud is reading, Stevenson is also reading. Freud will go on to, you know, develop other ways of thinking about these things, and Stevenson will go on to will write fiction about it.
I mean, right around this time, Freud's in his 30s.
Yeah.
He's refining the ideas. He won't write beyond the pleasure principle and refine the ego and the superego until like the 1920.
Yeah.
But
they're reading the same things right now.
Exactly. These are the things that are percolating in the discourse and that they're thinking about. And so it makes sense that there would be these thematic overlaps.
Yeah. Sure. These ideas, all these, you know, the not just psychological ideas, but these, you know, kind of, you know, psychoses, these, you know, diagnoses are all being developed right now in this, and towards the end of this 19th century. But the what's the book, the Ebbingcraft Psychopathia Sexualis, something like that, that's published right at this time, and Stevenson is aware of it. A famous psychological book about, you know, the kind of deviant sexual practices of people as how they're described at the time, but they're basically just how some people have sex. And Stevenson is clearly aware of that kind of thing going on. Just a little question. Kristen wanted to know, what is a penny number? The description of the streets where the Gin Palace, which is a gin joint, the Low French Eating House, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and 2-penny salads. I'm assuming the penny numbers are just penny cereals, you know, stories that people buy for a penny, like penny dreadfuls, and 2-penny salads. I don't know if that's food or something else, and I think it might not be food, and I'm not remembering. I wonder if it was in a note in one of the annotateds that says that is something. I'll have to look that up and put a note in the comment. But the penny numbers would have been the little weekly penny, usually thrilling adventure or horror stories that only cost a penny a piece. And like Barney the Vampire, little weekly penny issues, and people will read these adventures of this monster, but also famous, you know, or criminal stories. People loved reading those too. So, and they cost just a penny.
I believe that's also what it is, though I'm not sure. I can't log on to the OED at this time. It's like, that's way too hard.
Yeah.
but if you're interested,
2-penny salads might be slang for something, and I'm missing it, and I'm not remembering it. But or it's just cheap food. I don't know. So
it's cheap food. But I mean, 2-penny in the sense that it's cheap. Maybe not literally 2-penny salads, but that's a word that comes used to describe cheap things. Yes, I have verified. Penny numbers are penny dreadfuls, the small cheap cereals. And 2-penny salads, my annotation is telling me, is a literal translation.
Yeah.
We get to the bottom of things here.
Here we go.
Live.
We're doing it live. This is live
exactly.
annotation. All right. Incident of the Letter, Chapter 5. Now after this, he's seen the body. Utterson goes to Jekyll because clearly, you know, Hyde has murdered somebody because he was identified by the maid. Hyde has murdered somebody, and Jekyll's connected because of the stick. And he goes to see Jekyll. He's led to um, the area so it's Jekyll's house, the nice part, and then there's a back door and there's a garden, and then it leads to this laboratory or dissecting rooms, this other building, and that door leads out onto the other street. And we get a little history of the house here. The Dr. Jekyll had bought the house from the heirs of a celebrated surgeon. So there are dissecting rooms. That's what it is. That's his laboratory, was a dissecting room, which got dead bodies brought in, and it's a theater. So the surgeon would have taught. He would have had, surgeon students there, and he's dissecting a body in front of them and teaching them how to do this. But also note too that he goes right to Jekyll. He hasn't given Jekyll up to the police. He hasn't told the police that this was Jekyll's stick. And that's how police catch criminals. There's a connection and somebody brings it to them. But Utterson doesn't do that. He's not cooperating. He wants to go to Jekyll first. This is also the first time he's been in Jekyll's laboratory, I should call it. And it is a dingy, windowless structure, a distasteful sense of strangeness as he crossed the theater, once crowded with eager students and now lying gaunt and silent, tables laden with chemical apparatus, the floor strewn with crates and littered with packing straw. He goes into the doctor's cabinet meaning a room, and there is a cheval glass, which is a full-length mirror in there. That's not a usual thing you would find in the doctor's room there. And 3 dusty windows barred with iron. And there's Jekyll looking deathly sick. And Utterson says, "Have you heard the news?" Meaning that Hyde is, murdered. And the doctor shuddered. "They were crying it in the square. I heard them in my dining room." Now, Olivia, is he shuddering because he's committed a murder as Hyde, or because they're crying it in the public square?
This is a very good question.
So, I mean, is he upset that he's going to be found out and that people are, talking about it? It's now a public scandal. Or is it because he's upset that, he, in another guise, has just murdered someone?
I think maybe it's a combination. I mean, true to his nature, he's not one or the other thing. And whatever is in Hyde, when Hyde is distilled as Hyde, is also in Jekyll regularly. And that's the thing. Like, Hyde does not appear out of nowhere. Hyde is just a concentration of some of the worse stuff that's inside Jekyll every day. So I think both sides of this personality, are, the gin bottles that we looked at earlier make it seem like Dr. Jekyll is one thing and Hyde is another thing. Together they make a third thing. Yeah. But actually Jekyll is the third thing. Yeah. There's some sort of remainder once Hyde is removed of his good qualities, and we never actually meet with that entity. So we only get Jekyll. So I think when we're encountering Jekyll, we get a spectrum of reactions from self-interest and self-preservation and genuine remorse. And I think that's what we're getting now. And I think as Hyde's behavior is worse and worse and worse, Jekyll is sicker and sicker because he is reacting to Hyde's takeover, but also like his disgust at what Hyde is doing. But he's also anxious because he's the one doing all these things. He's afraid he's going to get caught. And in this way, or Jekyll is so human because he is guilty and he's afraid of being caught. He's also ashamed of himself and understands like why he would be reviled if people knew.
And that's all here in this speech here. Utterson, I swear to God, I will never set eyes on him again. I bind my honor to you that I am done with him in this world. It is all at an end. And indeed, he does not want my help. Now we're getting the he, right? You do not know him as I do, which is really, ironically funny. You do not know him as I do. He is safe. He is quite safe. Mark my words. He will never more be heard of. That he's covering for Hyde. But also what he's saying is that we know after finishing the story is that what he's promising is I'm not going to take the potion again. I'm done with this potion to become Hyde. I won't do it again. I realize it was a mistake taking it before. He says, I have grounds for certainty that I cannot share with anyone. Utterson says, if it came to trial, your name might appear. And he's like, no, it wouldn't. And I can tell you why, because Hyde ain't coming back. I received a letter. I am at a loss whether I should show it to the police or leave it in your hands. I have so great a trust in you. Like clearly, he's never thinking he's going to show it to the police. He knows that if he gives it to Utterson, it ain't ever going to the cops. Utterson's the kind of person who doesn't reveal personal info. That he'll keep the secret.
He's not an narc.
Yeah. So he is, that's why people trust him with everything. And he says, I cannot say that I care what becomes of Hyde. I am quite done with him. I was thinking of my own character, which this hateful business has rather exposed. So he even admits it. I mean, out loud that, I'm thinking of my own reputation now. And that's also an argument that Utterson would understand is I think one of the reasons he's saying this, like, it's my reputation, and Utterson gets that. This is, what he does. And the letter, which we don't get the exact wording, but it is signed in an odd upright hand, signed Edward Hyde. I love when it says Edward. And it signified briefly enough that the writer's benefactor, Dr. Jekyll, another word for him. He's a benefactor now. Protege, favorite, benefactor. Whom he had so long unworthily repaid for 1,000 generosities, need labor under no alarm. The wording is right. It's not technically in quotes here, but it sounds like it's exactly the letter. So unworthily repaid for 1,000 generosities, need labor under no alarm for his safety, as he had means of escape on which he placed a sure dependence. So he's going to be away and nobody's going to be able to catch him. Ha ha ha. This isn't a letter that's going to solve anything. But Utterson's like, it put a better color on the intimacy that he had looked for. And he blamed himself for some of his past suspicions. Utterson's completely taken in by this letter, that Hyde wrote this. And it says that Jekyll's not at fault. So of course, this is the truth. And now he asks him the final question. So it was Hyde who dictated the terms in your will about that disappearance. This is like at the end of like the usual TV mystery. The doctor seemed seized with a qualm of faintness. He shut his mouth tight and nodded. I know it, said Utterson. He meant to murder you. You had a fine escape. Jekyll says, I have had what is far more to the purpose. I have had a lesson. Oh God, Utterson, what a lesson I have had. And he covered his face for a moment with his hands. So Jekyll's suffering, as he should be suffering. But Utterson's thinks that it's over and that this is it and it's been solved. And I don't have to, we're all set here now. But of course we're not. And again, I just asked that question. Is Jekyll penitent over the murder, or is he just anxious over what a close call he's just had to being revealed? That's something I think we should keep asking ourselves till we get, and even after we get the confession at the end, because he does both in that. He both blames himself and says, I'm not to blame. So Utterson, the newsboys are all on the street. We get a little Newsies scene here, crying along. Special edition, shocking murder of an MP. And Utterson's thinking of he could not help a certain apprehension lest the good name of another should be sucked down in the eddy of the scandal. So it's not just a murder for Utterson, it's a scandal. Like Carew's murder is a scandal. And which, again, leads us to think that this is what people think. Like, he was murdered. There's nothing scandalous about that. Well, that's the way Utterson's thinking of it. And I think that's the way some of the readers then, that there's something else going on that we're not being told. Well, he gets back to his house, Utterson does. Mr. Guest is his head clerk. I like that name. And he gets out a bottle of particular old wine. No mortifying, vintages here. Utterson's getting out the good stuff. He's not drinking gin. He's going to get a nice wine out. And it's a nice one. And it even get a description. In the bottle, the acids were long ago resolved. The imperial dye had softened with time as the color grows richer in stained windows. The glow of hot autumn afternoons on hillside vineyards was ready to be set free and to disperse the fogs of London. That's a nice bottle of wine that he's drinking. Well, Guest sees the letter and he says, wait a minute. Is that that's an odd hand? And he says, oh, do you have a note from Dr. Jekyll? And he does, and he says, that's looks like same handwriting. It's Sherlock Guest here. The clerk laid the two sheets of paper alongside and sedulously compared their contents. There's a rather singular resemblance. The two hands are in many points identical, only differently sloped. Rather quaint, said Utterson, but he doesn't mean that. What he means is, oh shit. Mr. Utterson, alone that night, no sooner was he alone that night than he locked the note into his safe, where it reposed from that time forward. What, he thought, Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer, and his blood ran cold in his veins. So, Jekyll wrote the note, and now Utterson knows. And so it's not really resolved as he thought it was, but that secret's locked in his safe. And Utterson's not going to let anybody know.
No, he's not, because he's not truly a detective. He is a friend first and foremost.
Yes. He's the kind of detective that would cover up something. Now, wait, Sherlock Holmes does this plenty of times. Solves the case, and then
it's true.
We won't reveal it. Everything's okay, because there are several cases where Holmes is concerned with the reputation of the people, and there's not going to be another murder or another crime. So it is, Boscombe Valley mystery, finds out who did the murder and then he dies. So he's not going to reveal it because it'll affect the kids, even though all the money the kids inherited was stolen murder money. Because its reputation is more.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, yeah. But he does it, but Holmes does it like out of a sense of that Holmes becomes a sort of like arbiter of justice in lieu of the government or the police, and Utterson is doing it to protect his friend.
Yes, and only that. And it is regardless of what. There's no justice. Utterson's not concerned with any kind of justice.
Right, exactly. No, not at all. He's just like, oh God, buddy.
Holmes doesn't care about the law. He only cares about justice.
Right.
Utterson, it just cares about reputation.
Presumably Utterson also cares about the law, but to a degree that he's able to remove that association when he deals with his friend.
Yeah.
I mean, but then again, he's a lawyer, right? So if this novel is about hypocrisy in the worst senses, that quality is also embodied by our protagonist, by Utterson, a lawyer who does not uphold the law in order to protect his buddy.
He has knowledge that someone is hiding or covering up for a known murderer, and he's not going to come forward with it. As you could say, well, he's his friend, and that's fine, but it's still hypocritical for a lawyer, someone who is supposed to uphold law.
Everyone's a hypocrite in some degree or another in Jekyll and Hyde.
Everyone in this story
The
is.
strange hypocrisy of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Not Poole.
No, not Poole.
Not Mr. Guest.
Yeah, no, there are a couple exceptions.
All righty. That's it for tonight. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Ed. This was wonderful.
Biblioventurers, thank you for joining us for episode 2 of Monsters and Ghosts. Olivia, thank you for joining us. You will return for episode 4 in a couple of weeks. Our co-host schedule is available on our webpage. Olivia will alternate with Paul Chapman, and then Leslie Klinger, author of the new annotated Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, will join me for the final episode. On our next show, episode 3, Paul Chapman will join me to talk about chapter 6 to 8, when Utterson discovers Dr. Lanyon has received such a shock that he's going to die. Jekyll alarms his friend after a brief chat from his window. And then after Jekyll's disappearance, Utterson is finally forced to break into the laboratory, and everything will be resolved. Not at all. So then he gets the confessions and the letters to read. So thanks to our chat pool, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. And we couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Remember, if you're watching live and become a member right now, you will receive an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months. And let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. Bye, Olivia. Thank you. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the door to your biblioventure is always open. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.